Do you remember the days when we'd hear from Josh Kroenke and it would just be bad news? I do. But now are not those days, as Josh Kroenke has conducted yet another interview, and it's really positive. We've got transfer news to talk about, both ins and outs as well, in today's Arsenal Transfer Show. Hello and welcome to the Gooner Talk, back again with you guys and girls for another episode of what is the Arsenal Transfer Show, joining you every single morning at 8 a.m. UK time. Thank you as always for joining me and making this a part of your morning routine. It is incredibly appreciated. I hope you've had a fantastic start to your week and I hope that you're doing very, very well indeed. I have had, a much better start to my week than, let's say, last week, and things are looking good. Things are looking up. But tonight is going to be another long night, because, of course, Arsenal take on Liverpool at the Lincoln Financial Field in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania. And I will be doing the late shift this evening up until the early hours of the morning, covering the game. So I'm very much looking forward to it, which means, of course, I don't know whether or not there's going to be a show tomorrow morning or not. It depends upon how early we get to sleep. It depends upon how quickly I get to sleep. It depends how I'm feeling upon waking up as well. I would err on the side of caution. So just be prepared for that. All right. Just be prepared that there may not be an 8 a.m. show, but there will be 2 shows today, and I'll tell you more about that shortly. Good morning to you guys and girls in the chat box. NSW, Z, Olawale, Jacob, Martin, Carlton, Chris, Damien, Sean, Pikahu, Paul, Arasilki, Peter, Maximius, Kevin, PJ, Stephen, Angela, Pat, Amira, Boss Buller, Gary, Aidan, Mr. Ree, and Boss Buller continuing their membership with us. Thank you so much for the continued support, mate. It is very much appreciated. And we're going to kick on with today's stories after I tell you, of course, to make sure you drop a like on the video and subscribe to the channel if you're new around here, with those notifications turned on so you never miss a show. We try and reach 1K every single day in the like, so every single one of you counts. So please do make sure you drop a like on the video. And I see that you've noticed the shirt. I realized that I got this shirt when I went to Italy earlier this year, and I really should have worn it on the day that we announced Calafiori, but I forgot. So I'm wearing it today because, of course, there is still Calafiori news to talk about. Calafiori pictured, of course, in training ahead of the game against Liverpool. There is, of course, a hope that maybe he'll be involved and we'll get to see a little bit of what we can come to expect from Riccardo Calafiori in that game tonight, or the early hours of tomorrow. If you're based in the US, of course, it will be tonight for you. If you're going to the game, let us know. I hope you have an amazing time. I've had some of our listeners reach out to let me know that they are indeed going to be going. So that's fantastic to hear. And I hope you have an amazing time. For some of you, I assume potentially your first game seeing Arsenal, which is always a great story to hear as well. But yes, Riccardo Calafiori, we might indeed see in his first fixture for Arsenal tonight, which should be exciting. I'm looking forward to it. Meanwhile, Ihsan Khan, a good friend of mine in the press room, has produced a fantastic piece on the Mail, all about the ins and outs of this Chido Obi-Martin situation, his move to Manchester United, which of course is now being confirmed. But if you haven't read it, I recommend you go and read it. It's a brilliant piece to give you kind of the highlights, if you like, from this. Ihsan Khan reporting, the Obi-Martin had been offered, again, under 18s football with playing time with the under 21s when schedules allowed it, to elevate to training with the first team as the season went on. And apparently Chido Obi-Martin's camp wanted to skip the under 18s and to join the under 21s immediately, and that was a problem. But the deal breaker was apparently the money. His camp supposedly wanted a sum of money which was very far from what Arsenal were willing to pay. So the Gunners walked away despite liking the player's ability and him personally. However, it is important to point out there are 2 sides to these stories, and that Mail Sport understands that the decision to depart Arsenal on the players' side was not financially motivated. Now, there's been rumours going around social media yesterday that you may have seen that supposedly Arsenal's offer didn't quite reach the £15,000 per week. However, it was very close to that. but apparently Manchester United have doubled what Arsenal offered, which could mean that Chido Obi-Martin at Man United as a 16-year-old is on between 20 and 30,000 pounds a week, which for a 16-year-old is absolutely ludicrous. Like, Arsenal offered basically a record amount of money for the age bracket that Chido Obi-Martin is in, and it wasn't enough, seemingly, to convince him. And they will obviously say the pathway, neither. From from Isan's report there, I think it's a bit of a eyebrow raiser that Arsenal weren't perhaps more willing to say an immediate promotion to under 21s wasn't necessarily earned. I think there are certain scenarios where I understand why they did and didn't, but still, I'm not so sure if that's the case. For context, like Fabio Vieira's on just over £40,000 per week, and we signed him for £34 million as a player in his early 20s. Jakub Kivior's on around £50,000 to £60,000 per week. We signed him as a 22, 23-year-olds for 20 odd million quid. The amount of money that Man United are paying a guy that is 5-6 years off of these senior players at Arsenal is mad. And I do not blame Arsenal for doing what they've done here. I really don't. I think Arsenal have made the right decision. So we move, as the saying goes, and we move to Eddie Nketiah. Eddie Nketiah, who of course is still with the Arsenal team over in the United States. However, David Ornstein reported yesterday that Arsenal had rejected a bid closer to the 20 million euro figure, which is around 16 million pounds. Now, it is said that this bid is closer to Arsenal's valuation, but not quite there. I'd be surprised if this was accepted. Very, very surprised indeed. I think that from the point of view of Eddie Nketiah, I would be disappointed if we didn't get 25 million. I'd be very disappointed if we didn't get 20 million for Eddie Nketiah. And that is, of course, inclusive of add-ons. It's worth pointing that out. 16 million pounds is simply not good enough. Now, I hope that Arsenal reject this kind of out of hand, and that even though it's getting closer to that, the valuation that Arsenal have, there's concern. I think there's a little bit of concern around this, and I would be very frustrated if Arsenal don't get, upwards of 20 million at least. But I'm disappointed if we don't get 25 million, to be honest, in this situation. It could be balanced out by the Reece Nelson deal. I said 12 million pounds and more on Reece Nelson. There's suggestions it could be upwards of 15 million of either of Leicester City. There's suggestions that other clubs are also interested in Reece Nelson too. So if Arsenal get upwards of 50 million, that's really, really good business for us. But Eddie Nketiah for less than 25 million, I just don't see that as being worth it. I guess it depends on how quickly Arsenal would like to move the player on. If there's a real determination for this to be done quickly, Arsenal may be more amenable to that because they may want to reinvest money in another potential forward player, which I know that Arsenal fans will be disappointed if we don't get much money for Eddie Nketiah. But then again, if we end up reinvesting that money into a forward player, I think people would probably forget about it pretty darn quickly. But let's wait and see. It's gone very quickly from, Reece Nelson and Eddie Nketiah for 40 million, potentially the pair of them for around 30 to 35, which I think would be disappointing. I said before that if we get 25 for Eddie, 15 for Nelson, that's 40 million quid for the pair. Very happy indeed with that. But if it turned into 30 million for the pair, which would be 10 and 20, I wouldn't be happy at all. It would probably be a different combination of numbers, but it would effectively be like being 10 and 20, which I just wouldn't particularly be very happy with. So yeah, we'll follow this story and we'll continue to update on this if there's any changes. But the suggestions are that, of course, this is below Arsenal's valuation at the moment, and it's unlikely to have been accepted. But of course, any differences in that. Ty says, is there any possible reason for the linked price being linked to Eddie's wages? No, he's actually not on high wages for a player of his age bracket at the club that he's at. He's on around £100,000 per week, which is the same as Reece Nelson, which for a 24, 25-year-old playing for a club like Arsenal and has got over 160 appearances for Arsenal, if you're not on that amount of money by that point, I don't really know what to tell you. So the perspective that Eddie is on contextually high wages is incorrect. He's not on high wages for a player of his age bracket who has made that many appearances for Arsenal at all. So the wages are not... They may be an issue in terms of for a club like Marseille, because, of course, Marseille are, a Liga side. Wages don't tend to be as high unless you're PSG or sometimes Marseille. But, of course, that might be. So, contextually, for a club like Marseille, they might be considered higher. But for a player, as I say, that's made more than 160 appearances for Arsenal and is 25 years of age, £100,000 per week is not a high amount of money for a player in that age bracket at all. Moving forward, Stan Kroenke, again, my colleagues out in the US are doing some fantastic work. Stan Khan, of course, with that Chido Obi-Martin report. And James Ollie doing a brilliant article, an interview with Arsenal's co-chairman, Josh Kroenke, out there in the States as well. You can read the entire article, of course, on the ESPN website, and I encourage you to do so. Just to get a couple of highlights I wanted to pick out to talk about in today's show as well. He says, I've been involved with the club for over 10 years now around the board, and I really enjoy it and I love the club. I knew it would be very rewarding to get it back into a position to succeed and prove people wrong along the way. And I definitely think, that the Kroenke ownership have proved people wrong. We all had, our frustrations. We've had our criticisms. We've had our times where we've all been, holding our Kroenke out placards pretty darn high in the past as well. And I just think that the Kroenkes, Josh in particular, Stan's silent. Stan, you're not really going to hear too much from him, but it's always been, if you understand how the hierarchy works at Arsenal, Josh Kroenke is very much the face of the Kroenke ownership in an Arsenal perspective, whereas Stan does a lot more of the American sports, as well. And I think that the delegation of Arsenal to Josh from Stan is one of the better decisions that the ownership, of course, have made. And he's really taken it on board. You can tell the guy is a genuine supporter of Arsenal and really understands far more than say, a half a decade ago, or even more so a decade ago, where things are. There's some really interesting points about kind of where Arsenal are. He talked a little bit about Emery as well. He said within a year and a half or so of Wenger leaving, we had certain people in certain roles. Edu was on board as technical director, later made sporting director, of course. Unfortunately, it didn't work out with Unai Emery, but I'm pleased to see him go on to have success. He is a good man. I really respected him. I'm glad to see a good person who's having success elsewhere. It goes on to talk about the real impact of that time period, of course, was COVID, and that the rug was kind of pulled out from under some of us and the way things we were trying to do. And I think that people obviously always talk about the fact that COVID was the same for everybody and every club went through COVID, and why should it be any different for Arsenal? But it was different for Arsenal. The difference was for Arsenal, of course, that they'd literally just gone through a managerial transition from Wenger to Emery, had just got rid of Emery. Arteta comes into his first job ever and is in a situation whereby they need to invest a lot of money to overhaul the squad, to change things up. And we would have invested more in the team much earlier had COVID not happened. And that situation completely changed the way in which Arsenal had to operate for a 2-year period. And from that point of view, we needed to make sure that we, were sensible about how we did things, and we moved forward, hopefully with things much, much improved as well. But there is, of course, more detail of that interview on the ESPN website. The last thing I want to point out is just the point where it says, I think this group is ready for the challenge, and we're going to keep adding some talent to it so we have a chance to get one spot higher and really give our fans something to celebrate, which is, of course, a really good indication, of course, of what Arsenal's ownership are intent on doing. And that is, of course, investing. That is, of course, spending. That is, of course, bringing in more players. But they also want to work within the confines of the regulations that are in place. And we know that Arsenal don't want to get into a position that Chelsea have, or Newcastle have, or Villa have, or Forest have. They want to do this as best they can. Now, our last story to just talk about this morning is the continuation of the Mikel Merino situation. Just need to change the text here in a rush this morning, clearly. But Mikel Merino has favoured a move to Arsenal, it seems, despite interest from Barcelona, despite interest from Atletico Madrid. Feeling is that his preference, his priority is indeed Arsenal. But Simon Collins of the Evening Standard yesterday reported that Real Sociedad have indeed offered a brand new improved contract to Mikel Merino in a final attempt to try and keep him at the club. However, there has been reports in Spain suggesting a feeling that that will be unsuccessful and that he prefers a move to Arsenal. And that with so much noise surrounding one player, and with, of course, us being in a position where we know that Mikel Merino is a key figure in Arsenal's transfer business, it does mean that the time has come for a tactical breakdown of the Spanish international midfielder. And today, we will be doing that tactical breakdown. So set your alarms for 4:45 p.m. UK time. I'll be joined by one of our channel favourites when it comes to Spanish football. Very excited to link up once again with Alvaro Romeo, of course, who does on the continent side of things with the Turtley Football Show, and he does that show with, of course, James Horncastle and Julian Laurent and James Richardson. If you're a big fan of that podcast, he is a big part of that show for their continental look across the sport. And Alvaro is a good friend of mine who I really do appreciate coming on the show and has talked about previous, of course, La Liga talents. He helped us talk about previous players that we've been linked to. And it's no different here as I look forward to speaking to him later on today about Mikel Merino and getting some thoughts on the player. So, yes, very much looking forward to that. So that's 4:45 p.m. UK time. Set your alarms. Do join us in the live chat if you can. And, I'm looking forward to this one indeed. Stats analysis, expert analysis, live Q&A. You'll be able to put questions to Alvaro as well. So make sure you tune in. Right, let's go to part 2 and your questions then right after this. Okay, this is part 2 of the show where, of course, we tackle your questions and more. I can see that our resident Manchester United fan in the chat, Luke Shaw, is now complaining of being bullied. I mean, Luke, I have to say, mate, that you jumped in and really did start, trying to give it to Arsenal fans about Chido Obi-Martin. You got to take it. If you're going to give it, mate, you got to take it, I'm afraid. So, it's just the way it goes, my friend. Sally says, I thought Jesus was up for sale, but now the club say he's one of the best in the world. Do you think they tested the waters and now protecting their asset because they can't find a buyer? No, Sally, I don't think that at all. I don't know where it's come from that Jesus was kind of, up for sale, or, there was like Arsenal were putting the feelers out about him maybe potentially being someone they would sell. From the perspective of the situation, there was always kind of an openness should indeed a very, very, very good offer come in for Jesus. But it was never a situation where they were actively kind of looking for suitors for Jesus. So I don't know where that view or that information has necessarily come from. I think there was maybe an openness to a sale, but that doesn't mean that they're trying to push Gabriel Jesus out of Arsenal. I don't think that there may have been a misinterpretation. The idea of being like listening to offers is very different from Arsenal are looking to sell the player. Being open to offers does not mean that you are actively trying to push a player out the door. If he was, it would be Arsenal have transfer listed Gabriel Jesus. Of course, they're going to be open to offers for Gabriel Jesus. At the start of the window, Arsenal were looking at other strikers like Benjamin Šeško, for instance, and had they have found a club come in to pay a significant amount of money for Jesus, they would have been open to it. But he's not up for sale, if you like. They're just open to the idea if a proposal came in that met expectations of a potential sale. It's not kind of black and white of you either are up for sale or you're not. You can be in kind of a grey area in the middle where Arsenal would be happy to keep Jesus, but if an offer came in that would test their resolve, they might be open to the idea of it. So that's worth pointing out. Ty says, hi Tom, Arteta said Calafiori was brought as he wanted depth and we were lucky with injuries last year. Are you worried that we're not getting cover for Odegaard considering how important he is to our play? Well, of course, it's worth pointing out that Ethan Nwaneri has had a fantastic summer pre-season tournament, and that situation may lend itself to a potential breakthrough, and the club may be conscious of not wanting to block that pathway for Nwaneri anymore by signing another attacking midfielder. They may see that Mikel Merino coming in, of course, is more of a replacement for Smith Rowe's position in the squad, and that therefore they don't really need to bring anybody else in because they've also got Fabio Vieira. And I know that Fabio Vieira isn't convinced everybody, but the moment he is still at the club, he is still part of the team, and there hasn't been any suggestions that he'll be leaving right now. So I think Vieira will play a part this season. Of course, he needs to stay fit. That was the biggest problem with Vieira last season, is he couldn't stay fit. So he couldn't even come off the bench to get opportunities because for the whole middle part of the campaign, he wasn't there. I think there is a player in Fabio Vieira. I think the jury is still very much out on Vieira. I don't think I've made a conclusion on him. We have gone through 2 seasons with him, and I do have my 2-season rule, which is why if an offer was to come in for Vieira, I'm not exactly opposed to it being accepted depending on what level it is. But I'm still very open-minded about a 3rd season of Vieira to see indeed what he can produce if he can stay fit. This season is very much the full-on cut-off point, and a conclusion should be made outright come the end of the campaign. But it's still an open practice. Ryan says, just a comment, I think the gap between Arsenal and Man City was depth. The drop-off in the bench was massive. I think we now have a competitive squad regardless of rotation. And I talked about this, Ryan, a lot on the channel this summer. It was about raising the floor for me, because raising the ceiling for a side that finished 2 points off Manchester City is going to be incredibly difficult. Incredibly difficult. We've seen this news surrounding Victor Osimhen, of course, dropping yesterday, suggestions that Chelsea were in talks over a loan to buy deal, but then his agent has come out and suggested that, or hinted towards that necessarily not being so much the case, although I have doubts about doubting David Ornstein's information, which would always be absolutely top. So I feel as though there is credence to those stories, but I think that Arsenal have lacked the obvious candidate for a centre-forward signing. Gyökeres, of course, is a big profile, but probably the biggest striker gamble out there on the market right now. Plus £86 million, 84 to £86 million is a lot of money for a player with one really, really good season in a, what you would consider a competitive European Champions League level league in Portugal. So there are question marks there. But Arteta himself has said that he doesn't expect, and it was Curtis Shaw, of course, who asked the question, good question, about kind of the expectation around, if there would be a Declan Rice level signing. It's always important, with those transfer questions that you're not naming players and you're asking more broadly, you're going to get a better answer. And I think we got that from Arteta by saying that they don't expect. It was we got an answer on that kind of Declan Rice level, which we have been reporting over here. That has been the expectation that we've been talking about for a few months now, that we didn't expect Arsenal to go to the levels of Declan Rice this summer. It was unlikely that they would do that. So that's important to point out. Sufyan says, hope you well, Tom. Do you think rumours of Gyökeres are true or fake news, especially since Lisbon reduced the sell-on clause? I haven't heard anything about, by the way, clauses being reduced or buyouts being reduced, etc. I have no doubt Arsenal's interest is real in the player, that they've appreciated the player, they've watched the player, scouted the player. I just don't know how realistic it is that Arsenal... I just don't think it's realistic at all to expect... us to move for him, really. I'd be very surprised if we did. I'd be very, very surprised if we did. Dalton says, Curtis Shaw asked the question. I know I said that. I thought I said that he had as well. I know you guys have. I have absolutely zero beef with Curtis at all. My issue there is, of course, that I think someone on Curtis's channel said Tom would be happy to have a debate, which I would be. And someone messaged me on my channel saying Curtis would want a debate about Arteta's position, which I'm very much more than happy to have a conversation with Curtis, and more than welcome to jump on Curtis's channel or vice versa to talk about the managerial situation. And when someone sent me a link to Curtis's channel where he spoke about me, he said that he would be open to having a chat. But when I've reached out via DM, it's been completely ignored. So I have absolutely zero beef with the guy. I don't know where that's come from. So we can nip that in the bud right now. And as I said, he asked a good question. It got a good answer in the press conference the other day. Cross Jonker says, do you reckon Martin Odegaard will push for a shirt number change with Smith Rowe now gone? Yeah, someone in my chat box put this yesterday in the chat box, and it inspired me to write a piece on this to kind of discuss about who could take that number 10 shirt. And actually, it turns out that there's reports from when Odegaard signed that he wanted the number 10 shirt Arsenal, but Smith Rowe had kind of already bagsied it, if you like. And so therefore, he He got the number 8 shirt in the end when he re-signed for Arsenal on a permanent deal. But maybe it happens. I know a few people replied in tweets saying that the club should respect the fans that have already bought the number 8 Odegaard shirt. You know, what tends to happen in those situations is we see the club will hopefully, if that number change happens, it's usually one of the few times that they will kind of change the shirts for you. I hope that that's the case if that happens, but just because fans have bought a shirt number already doesn't mean that a player can't change it. You buy that shirt with that number in the knowledge that there is potential for that player to change their number. That's why for my home shirt, I've got Havertz because I know 29 is not going to change. And for my away shirt, I've got Ben White because I know the number 4 is going to change. And I'll probably wait a bit longer. And I usually, on the third kit, I usually get a new signing. Last year, I did get Saka because I knew number 7 was going to change. But it may be Calafiori. I may end up getting Calafiori on this shirt as well. And Temi says, you and Curtis are my favourite Arsenal channels. Temi, I think it was you. I think it might have been you that instigated this whole misconception about fake drama between me and Curtis. As I've said, and I'll say it here again, I am absolutely more than happy to have a conversation with Curtis about anything managerial, anything Arsenal-wise. And my only issue is don't say on stream that you'd be more than open to have a chat and then just not reply to a DM. That's my only gripe that I've got. Don't say one thing on stream and then do something different in DMs. That's the only gripe that I've got. Otherwise, I respect the hard graft that Curtis puts in on his work and his channel, and it shows the level that he's got to, that he's in a situation where he's in a press conference asking questions. You've got to respect it. CJ Dan says Arsenal need another attacker, whether that be a striker or a winger. Is there a world where Martinelli plays up top in a future season? I think that ship has sailed. I really do. I do think that ship has sailed. I do think that Martinelli is a wide forward and will continue to be a wide forward, and I look forward to seeing that happen. But I think that this season is massive, absolutely massive for Martinelli, and I really hope that we can see it happen. I should see some people asking about Arsenal's third kit. I'm looking online, and apparently there's suggestions that the third kit will launch around the 12th to the 14th of August. So we're still a couple of weeks away, it seems, from the from that side of things. So if you're expecting a third kit drop soon, it's probably going to be in a couple of weeks from the rumors that are circulating on social media. Nick says modern strikers need to have a physical dominance, and Martinelli is perfect as a winger. I think that we lack natural wingers. Like, we don't have loads of them. We have Saka and Martinelli, and that's kind of it. Nelson also, but is obviously not to the standard that we need those wingers. That's why I'd like Arsenal to go out and sign an out-and-out winger this summer. I really think it's a priority. After the centre midfielder and before striker, it's a priority for me. I want us to go out and sign a striker. Yeah, let's wait and see. Idan says, if no big transfers are expected, is it possible for us to sign a 60 million player? It is hard to understand what is a maximum fee, maybe 30 million max per signing, and if so, what options do we have? It's a question that I've asked Idan as well. I wrote about this in response to Arteta's words from Curtis's question. I said, if we're not expecting like a Declan Rice signing, where's the cutoff? Like, what do we describe as kind of a signing like that? Because Declan Rice was 105 million pounds. Gyökeres would be 84 million pounds, which is, 20 million plus less than what Declan Rice cost, which is a lot of money, but 84 million pounds I'd still think is a big, big signing. Is 60 million still a big, big signing? Clearly 42 million isn't, because Calafiori has come in, even though the initial fee is significantly lower than that. I don't know where the cutoff is. And I think it's a really good question to ask, but one I sadly don't think that I nor others will have the answer to. And it's one that we will have to wait and see throughout the course of the window what Arsenal end up spending, because that is ultimately where we're at right now with that situation. Brennan says, TC, all that news that United would sell a load of their squad, would you still sign Rashford or any of the rest of their squad? Yeah, I mean, they've not, have they? Man United have still got a lot of the players like Rashford, like Scott McTominay, that people expected them to leave during this window. I mean, just having a quick look at their squads on the website. Let's have a quick look. Players, men's team. You've got Harry Maguire still there. Victor Lindelof is still there, but he is being linked with a move away from the club. Aaron Wan-Bissaka is still there, but he's being linked with a move away from the club. You've got Scott McTominay still there. Casemiro, despite being linked to Saudi Arabia, is still there. Rashford is still there despite links away. Anthony's still there. Jadon Sancho's still there. So they have not moved on a lot of the players that people thought would be moved on, but there is still a lot of time to go as well. Javid says, morning, Tom, Spotify listener for many years. The only downside of catching a live show is not getting to watch it later. Thank you for the early content. Thank you, Javid. And thank you to all of our listeners, of course, who listen on Spotify. We had a very, very nice review left for us on iTunes the other day, which I did read. So thank you for that. It is very much appreciated when people send in those. It was from Huckabees, says Tom is very dedicated, providing a daily podcast at 8 a.m. every day, even while on holiday, sometimes recording in his car. He has a great sense of humor and provides balanced and objective takes on Arsenal. So thank you, Huckabee, for the very kind review. And those really do help us out on iTunes. So if you are watching and you can, you have an Apple ID or whatever, and you're able to go onto iTunes and leave us a written review, they really do help us out. So if you're on Spotify, leave us a 5-star review. And if you're on iTunes, leave us a 5-star written review. It really does help us out. So thank you to those that have left those. And it helps push us up those rankings. We broke into the top 150 podcasts of Great British Sports Podcast the other week. That was incredible. We've slipped a little bit. We're around 170-ish now. It goes up and down each week, but it was an amazing achievement to see us creep into the top 150. So thank you for the kind support, and those written reviews definitely help. Vakan says, hi, Tom. I'm planning to write an economics dissertation on the transfer market inflation. Could you give me your initial thoughts on the topic? Goodness me. I thought I quit teaching. Still delivering education. I think it's really important to point out another factors in, of course, the inflation of the transfer market, and of course the fluctuations. I think it's important that you talk about COVID and the impacts that COVID had on the market inflation. I think it's important that you go into the Chelsea situation, the impact that Chelsea have had on the market, paying buyout clause for the likes of Enzo Fernandez because they've got a brand new owner coming. But also then talk about the recent introduction of the more stringent financial regulations of profit and sustainability. I think that's really, really important to include in any kind of assessment or understanding of why market inflation has gone up. But also what you've got to understand is that, as TV revenues have gone up season upon season upon season upon season, that is naturally going to see an increase in spending, which is naturally going to see an increase in player valuations. So all of that is going to change things. And Noon in the chat says the concept of the Super League also potentially has changed things. But there's conflicting factors like PSR's trying to push it down, inflation and COVID and spending of new owners like Chelsea have tried to push it up. So all of these things have changed. But the Premier Leagues in particular will be the biggest impact on the price tags going up for players. Because if you actually look at transfers, interleague transfers, like transfers between Spanish clubs, transfer between Italian clubs, transfer between German clubs, you look at the transfer fees of those players compared to transfers between Premier League clubs or from clubs abroad to Premier League teams, and there is an absolutely stark difference between the two. So lots of information there. Hopefully you can take it into account, and I'll make sure to send you an invoice across for tutoring. P-Sharp says, I think Arteta was more suggesting there's no players available out there that will absolutely be raising the ceiling and the obvious big money that they would cost. Another hint at the squad improving. I guess that's another way that you could look at it. You could look at it as him saying that he doesn't expect them to do that because he doesn't see them on the market. And I think that's a very fair point. We've talked about the market across this window not necessarily being, a situation whereby we've seen standout candidates, and the ones that we like Alexander Isak, have got huge transfer fees, upwards of 120 million quid or whatever it is, that we just don't see as being realistic, and the club would have no interest of spending that amount of money as well. Idan says, hi, Tom. Marseille spent 30 million on Mason Greenwood, so maybe that's the bare minimum we should expect for Eddie. What do you think? It's difficult again as well, because with Marseille, they've spent the majority of their budget on Mason Greenwood, so are they going to be able to then justify spending another close? I mean, the French league is not, besides PSG, is really struggling financially. And I don't know how affected Marseille are, but they are spending a lot of money for the context of a French club right now. Cosmin says, hi, Tom. Do you think Chido Martin Obi chose Man United because he sees a path just because there are a top 5 to 8 teams and there is no real push to perform? I mean, it's difficult because Man United have only just signed Joshua Zirkzee. They've got Rasmus Højlund. The pathway doesn't necessarily look as obvious there either. I struggle when you're seeing money being paid at huge amounts of money for 16-year-olds. I just don't think. And Man United fans, if I was a Man United fan, I would have concern. I'd be, delighted that you've managed to bring in a very exciting young player. But £30,000 per week for a player who's had a physical advantage over a lot of the players that he's played against, the level that he's played against, is a huge sum. And it's not good. It's not a good thing for the market in general. It's not a good thing at all. So, there is worry about what those types of deals might do to the market, especially at a much younger age. And Chelsea, again, come into that fold. They've been snapping up all these very young players, 16, 17, 18 years of age, and putting huge sums of money into these deals, particularly from South America. And it is a bit strange how they just continue to invest and invest. And these players at the moment, you think about Casadei from Inter, had a good season on loan with Leicester, but hasn't really done much at Chelsea. And then they look like they want to try and bring in Victor Osimhen after they've signed Nicholas Jackson, after they've signed Christopher Nkunku. It's really strange. Ben says, did you see Xhaka's comments? It seems a bit disrespectful in my opinion. What do you think? He said basically that he didn't see moving from Arsenal to Leverkusen as a step back, but instead 2 steps forward. I'm not that fussed, to be honest. I don't really care. He's a Leverkusen player, and he's won the league, and he's gone invincible doing it. He's taken a step forward in his career. He's a league winner now. Now, if you want to talk about what you think about a club like Arsenal and a club like Leverkusen, is Leverkusen a bigger club than Arsenal? No. Is a step from Arsenal to Leverkusen a step forward in terms of the size of the club you've moved to? No. But is it a step forward in his career in terms of winning titles, in terms of being more competitive to win those competitions that he's in? Evidently, yes, because he's picked up a cup competition and he's picked up an Invincible League trophy. So, yeah, of course, there's the 2 steps of 2 trophies. Of course, I don't think it's disrespectful at all. I think it's maybe a little bit, with respect, oversensitive to be bothered by those comments. And I do think there is absolutely, there's credence to what he's saying. Leverkusen aren't a bigger club than Arsenal, no way. But I saw this, I don't know if you've seen this, there's kind of this video going around of a Juventus fan being very irritated by Calafiori's move to Arsenal. You may have seen it across your socials. And in it, he says, at the moment, Arsenal are a better team than Juventus. But Arsenal aren't a bigger team than Juventus. And he's right. Juventus are a bigger team than Arsenal. I'm magnanimous enough to say that. You look at their history, you look at what they've won, and they are a bigger team than Arsenal. But right now, they're not a better team than Arsenal. Arsenal are the better team. And so, therefore, it makes sense for Calafiori to move. I didn't agree with his points regarding Calafiori. The only thing that I did think had any kind of credence to it was his assessment of the size of the 2 clubs. So, yeah, Xhaka's given a lot to Arsenal. And let's be honest, Arsenal fans disrespected that man to levels that were, so far beyond the line that I'm surprised he has any respect left for Arsenal. And I think the respect that he does have for Arsenal is because of Mikel Arteta, and some of the fans, of course, that stuck by the guy. But ultimately, Granit Xhaka was abused, and anybody that cannot understand why what happened in that Crystal Palace game happened is because you've not done enough looking into what happened to him. If you think it's okay for abuse to be sent towards a man's unborn child, feel free. But you're the wrong one in that situation. I'm sorry, you just are. So if you can't get over the fact that he took his shirt off after being substituted and booed off the field, and you don't understand it, do I agree with him doing it? No, of course not. He shouldn't have done it. Do I understand that he did it? Yeah, without a question. If you want to say certain things about people's unborn children, feel free. But when that's going at him day upon day upon day, hour after hour on social media, the fact that he shows any respect to Arsenal at all is frankly a miracle. So yeah, and let's not beat around the bush. He helped contribute to one of Arsenal's best seasons in, more than a decade, and was a big contributor to that season where we nearly won the league as well. So yeah, and helped us to an FA Cup victory as well. It's worth pointing out too. Amaru Gooner says, Tom, the reason some clubs are seen as bigger than Arsenal is the winning of the Champions League, and that's always used, and quite right too. Quite right too. The Champions League obviously should be used against Arsenal. That's why Chelsea have got a great argument when it comes to the size of the clubs. Historically, Arsenal are a bigger team than Chelsea and have won far more trophies than them. But if you're a Chelsea fan, you're well within your rights to point out the fact that they have 2 Champions League titles to Arsenal's none. So, of course, there's a debate there. Of course, there's a debate to be had. I would argue, I think that Arsenal historically, over a longer period of time, have had far more success broadly and have won European trophies over their history as well. But Chelsea, in the last 20 years, have been better than Arsenal and have been more successful than Arsenal. And that's not up for debate. That's just a reality. And you have to be magnanimous enough to accept that. So, yeah. Van says, hey, Tom, haven't made it in a while. Why is there no interest in Victor Roque? Or is he not up to the level that we're looking for, even though he's still very young? Hasn't really broken into Barca, has he? It's not really worked. They invested a lot of money in him, but it's not necessarily worked out yet. So I've heard very little about Victor Roque. So I can't necessarily comment, nor have I seen too much, but he's not broken into things either. Zan says, how many Champions League will change that? Probably 2. You know, if you Arsenal win 2 Champions Leagues, then Chelsea have no leg to stand on. You know, league titles, Arsenal have won more. FA Cups, Arsenal have won more. Trophies in general, Arsenal have won more. So they'd have to win 2 Champions Leagues to pick that up. And Arsenal lack a Champions League at the moment, which sadly stops us from putting us into the bracket of clubs that have done that. And Arsenal lack that. And I have confidence that Arsenal are in the best position they've potentially ever been to win a Champions League in the context of the sport. Some might say that we were in a much better position with the Invincible era, but I think actually during that period of time, the clubs around were far harder to beat. You know, your Manchester Uniteds, your Barcelonas, your Real Madrid more so now, of course, as well, but Juventus, the Italian sides were better. The Champions League, when the Invincibles were around, was far harder to win, I think, than the Champions League is now. And so I do think that we have a much better chance now than we did in the mid-2000s of winning the Champions League. And I think that we are in the top 3 candidates to win it for next season. I think if you look across the bookies' odds for next year, Arsenal are 3rd favourites. And that represents the progress that we have made as a club as well in the last few years. Cal says, Tom, thank you for the level-headed insight on Xhaka's comment. Xhaka did all the best he could for Arsenal, and he deserves the path that he is on now. He absolutely does. I'm looking forward to seeing him in, next Wednesday. I hope there's an opportunity to perhaps ask him a couple of questions because, of course, he should be back at that point with Leverkusen as they come back to the Emirates for that friendly on Wednesday next week. I'm very much looking forward to it. Franklin says, if we win 1 Champions League, Chelsea fans will still claim to be a bigger club even though we have twice as many leagues. Of course they will, and that's why we need to win 2, mate. That's why we need to get 2 under our belt, and hopefully we will do that. Ty says, hi, Tom. I've been an Arsenal fan for 40 years. I loved being in the Champions League back in the day, but when I thought we had a chance of winning it, there was years I wished we were in the Europa League. And I remember those times where a lot of people said that they wished we were in the Europa League because they felt that being in the Champions League simply wasn't worth it. We've been in the Europa League, and I hope people realise how mistaken they were now to wish those wishes. Being in the Champions League is important. Being in the Champions League gives you a chance of winning that competition. Winning the Europa League is a bit so-so for me. Had we have won it under Unai Emery, it would have been a great achievement, sure. But it just completely pales in comparison to it. Jason says, 3rd, who's second favourites to win the Champions League, Jason? Champions League, mate. We're not talking about the Premier League. Arsenal are definitely the second favourites of the Premier League. We're talking about the Champions League. So Man City and Real Madrid, obviously. Which with now Real Madrid having Endrick and Mbappe is going to be very, very tough. Very tough. King says, I feel that we have a bit of a European duck to break. We should have probably won the Europa at least once while we were in it every year. I agree. I hope it doesn't add any extra pressure when we play in Europe. Duncan says 13 league titles is no joke. Chelsea are nowhere near us. Historically, as I said, it's absolutely no joke. But while you've got those Champions League under your belt, you've always got a chance. You've always got an argument. That's just the reality of what it was. Let's scroll up a little bit more, shall we? I might have missed some comments. Chris says, I hate Xhaka more than Van Persie. At least the latter never disrespected the captain's armband and basically looked like, oh, Chris. You need to do your reading, mate. Amaro Gooner says, Tom, I'm happy with the Chelsea being gobby, just bringing up our women winning the quad, which also includes that Champions League. Of course, we can talk about the women's team and their successes, but, the debates, sadly, are always going to lack the same level of gravitas because of the size of the two sides of the sport. That is the reality of it, and that's the reality of any conversations. And that's because of a lot of factors. Women's football and women's sport in general was banned for a long, long time. And so is never going to be able to reach the same kind of, levels, and so therefore you're never going to be able to see an argument debate going on between Arsenal and Chelsea fans about who's bigger, and sadly the women's side of the sport playing a vital role in that debate. It should. You're absolutely right. It should. But the reality is that it's not going to. And Chris, to be fair to him, follows up by saying, okay, I didn't know about the abuse suffered specifically, and so I'm glad that maybe that's made you change your mind a bit. So it's good. We've used that word magnanimous a lot today, and it is. Humbleness is a good word. Dominico says, Tom, looking ahead to the next match against Liverpool, are you expecting anything different for Liverpool with Arne Slot in charge? I had a quick look at their game against Real Betis. They're still playing attacking football as expected. They're missing a lot of players. It's worth pointing out. Salah is there. Szoboszlai is there. Harvey Elliott is there. Quansah is there. Curtis Jones, I think, is injured. Tsimikas is available. Conor Bradley's there. But they are lacking a lot of big players. No Diaz. No Trent Alexander-Arnold. No... who have they got? Nunez, no one there. No Van Dijk, I don't think yet. Maybe Van Dijk will come back, but I doubt it. But yes, there's still a lot of players missing for them at the moment. No Robertson, I don't think. He wasn't in the game against Betis, so I don't know if that's changed or not. Maybe it has. But this is their second pre-season game. They've only played one, which was that game against Betis. So still plenty to change. I've been going for 45 minutes now, which is quite a long time, more than I was expecting to go on for. So I am going to wrap things up there. There's nearly 1,200 of you listening on YouTube. There's nearly 400 of you listening on social media. So thank you. Always make sure if you do listen on socials to hop over to YouTube and watch us here. It does get you more integrated and involved with the show, and you can ask more questions in the chat and get involved with the TGT community. So I encourage you to do so. If you're listening on audio platforms, thank you for your support. Please do leave a written review on iTunes and leave us a 5-star review on Spotify too. And if you're here on YouTube, make sure you drop a like. Help us on our way to 1K every single day. And if you're new to the channel, perhaps you're finding us for the first time. We do these shows every single day at 8 a.m. And I'm going to be live later on today at 4:45 p.m. UK time, joined by Spanish football expert and commentator Alvaro Romeo to have a good chat about Mikel Merino. I can practice my Spanish pronunciations even more and get a lesson from Alvaro in all of that. So I look forward to it. Do join us for our tactical breakdown of Arsenal's potential summer midfield signing. I look forward to it, and I look forward to seeing you all very soon. There may or may not be a show tomorrow morning. It depends upon the sleep situation after a 3 o'clock bedtime after the game against Liverpool. So yes, do be aware of that. Have a fantastic day. Stay safe, stay well, stay happy and respectful, and as always, up the Arsenal.